ABUJA, sakop sa KBP, kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas.
Filipino living in Middle East, Europe, Asia and the Pacific, USA or Canada, you are our story. You are our Filipinos World. The Filipinos World Saturday every 4 to 5 p.m. only here on RPN DXKO 1360.
This program is brought to you by Love Module and Envirocool.
Good afternoon, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, and to the Filipinos across the globe. Assalamualaikum to our Muslim brothers and sisters. My name is NAZH-FAR, MARIWA BERGANIO, and you are watching the Filipinos World. We are broadcasting live from Cagayan de Oro City, Philippines, powered by CNN Philippines, TV5 Cagayan de Oro City. We are also live streaming on Facebook via facebook.com/RPN Cagayan de Oro 1368. Today, October the 2nd, and we are celebrating the International Day of Nonviolence. The International Day of Nonviolence is an occasion to disseminate the message of nonviolence, including through education and public awareness. This resolution reaffirms that the universal relevance of the principle of nonviolence and the desire to secure a culture of peace, tolerance, understanding, and nonviolence. Yesterday, October the 1st, the Philippines political aspirants began filing their certificates of candidacy or COCs for the 2022 Philippine elections. Senator Manny Pacquiao, together with his vice presidential candidate, Representative Lito Atienza, filed under Partido ng Demokratikong Pilipino, the Pacquiao Wing. We are yet to hear news from Mayor Isko Moreno and Dr. Willie Ong Tandem, Senator Ping Lacson, and Senate President Tito Soto. Vice President Leni Robredo and her vice presidential candidate, Mayor Sara Duterte or former Senator Bongbong Marcos. Meanwhile, President Rodrigo Duterte, who has expressed for the vice presidential bid, hadn't filed his certificate of candidacy yet. The filing will be until October 8, 2021. In the meantime, today, the Filipinos World will feature a different discussion on global issue. AUKUS is a trilateral security between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, announced on the 15th of September 2021 for the Indo-Pacific region. We will be joined by our guest, Dr. Andrew S. NEVIN, World Economist, live from Abuja, Nigeria. Together with Dr. NEVIN is Professor Roland Simbulan of the University of the Philippines. He is the Vice President for Center for People's Empowerment in Governance. So we will be right back.
Modal manufactures a highly distinctive and exclusive range of interior solutions that combines functional excellence with design appeal. Solutions with integrated, innovative, ergonomic features to well-designed workplaces. Our company is based on the inherent values that shape the core of who we are. It is through our living values that we continue to fulfill the promise of our ideal and environmental design standards. Each and every groundbreaking product we've introduced over the years has been the result of our team's hard work and dedication to provide our absolute best to who we care most about, who is our customers. Whether the job is big or small, our team is used to solving complicated tasks and make sure to get projects to successful completion. Whether it is local or global. This is why Labmodal is known as one of Europe's leading manufacturers of innovative system solutions for devices used in laboratory facilities, hospitals, and educational facilities. Solutions that can be easily adapted to the growing needs and workflows demands of the future. Labmodal, designing safe.
For your hospital chemical storage, classroom interior design, school furniture, storage unit, room cupboards for schools or hospital system cabinets, please get in touch with Labmodal via email at info@labmodal.com or visit their website www.labmodal.com. On the 15th of September 2021, Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States forged alliance for a trilateral pact or agreement for the Indo-Pacific region. Under the pact, the US and the UK will help Australia to acquire nuclear-powered submarines. Although the joint announcement by Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and US President Joe Biden did not mention any other country by name, and anonymous White House sources have allegedly said it is designed to counter the influence of China in the Indo-Pacific region. However, Johnson later told Parliament that the move was not intended to be adversarial toward China. Joining us this afternoon, live from London, the United Kingdom, is our executive producer, Mr. Paul Markevicius. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Naz, and good afternoon to the Filipinos world. Morning here from London. We have a very interesting topic this afternoon. We talk about the trilateral pact of Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, known as AUKUS, for the Indo-Pacific region. Let us welcome TFW's very good friend, Dr. Andrew S. NEVIN, live from Abuja, Nigeria, and Professor Roland Simbulan from the University of the Philippines. Good morning, and good afternoon, I should say, sirs. Welcome to TFW.
Good afternoon, Paul. It's always a great honor to be with TFW and the professor today.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. And how are you, Professor, today?
Good afternoon, Paul, and good afternoon, Andrew. I'm happy to be with your program.
And very, very honored to have you here, both of you, today. Let's start talking about this AUKUS agreement, which maybe took quite a few people by surprise. I'm going to just quote something from British newspaper, The Telegraph. It reported in March 2021 that the Australian Navy Chief Vice Admiral Michael Noonan met in London with his British counterpart, Admiral Tony Radakian, and requested assistance from the UK and the US in acquiring nuclear-powered submarines. I think it's important to stress it's nuclear-powered. The newspaper reported the British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab helped broker the deal. And the New York Times too also reported that Australia first approached the UK for assistance. Indeed, a trilateral discussion was held between Johnson, Biden and Morrison at the June 2021 G7 summit held in Cornwall, England recently. The talks took place without Macron's knowledge, leader of France. This approach was possible as a result of the UK not entering into a formal foreign policy and security treaty in its post-Brexit deal with the EU. As a result, the UK was free to pursue enhanced cooperation with other allies. Morrison has said Australia had been considering an alternative to the attack-class submarine deal for the past 18 months, which is the one that it had been in discussions with for France for at least that period and probably a lot longer. I'm going to start with Andrew. Andrew, what's your take on the agreement, the AUKUS agreement by these three powerful nations, and how do you think it might impact, how does it affect other countries? We can reference China, France, Taiwan possibly, and any other country. So over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, Paul, it's sort of another step in the escalation of the tensions that we're seeing in this part of the world. I mean, as you know, and regular listeners know, I lived in China for 10 years, speak the language. I was there the first time in 1983. So as we watch the trajectory of Chinese economic ascendancy is now kind of translating into its political objectives. And the situation gets more and more difficult on that. I mean, if we go back for a minute when I lived there, that was a period in the 2000s when China was, in a way, growing its economy and trying very hard not to, in a sense, ruffle feathers. And I remember lecturing in the United States at times at a business school there, and people were just not aware of, they just didn't, assume that China would never be an economic rival. So in a sense, this kind of stealth strategies worked very well for China, because by the 2010s or the mid 2010s, all of a sudden the world, people understood China's economic strength now translating into military strength, a real strategy focused around technology. And then, of course, we've now got the flashpoints that have emerged. So this step with the AUKUS deal is just another step on that, which is just raising tensions and show there's no kind of easy resolution to this. So I just go back for a moment, and if people old enough might remember Francis Fukuyama saying the end of history with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The Western kind of liberal economic and social model would be exported around the world. As it turns out, we're kind of sitting here 20 plus years later, and that's in fact not turned out at all. So very difficult situation for the world. And I think in a way it's a bit disappointing for me, personally disappointing that you're not seeing the Western world kind of unite in its decisions about how to kind of counter the Chinese situation. Instead, we have this fracturing with France on the outside. And then I'll just conclude for the moment, of course, it creates a lot of difficulties for, the all the countries, including the large ones in Southeast Asia, and particularly, of course, where, this is a Filipino show, it creates issues for the Philippines, where the Philippines has traditionally been an ally of the United States. More recently, under President Duterte, it's pivoted a little bit to be closer to China. It's difficult for countries to be close to both the United States and China in this world.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. We will draw out the potential or real pivotal role that the Philippines has by design or default, partly through its positioning geographically in the Pacific, in the South China Seas. So we will do that. It's interesting, your comments on the economics. We can look back over the years and point to, the economics, the prevailing economic conditions being the condition that has actually brought about the dissolution of the former Soviet Union. That particular period in history was largely to do with, the Soviet Union's economic weakness and reliance and dependency on the rest of the world. So it dropped its military stance in order to enable that those more fruitful alliances and to bring to help the economy of its countries. So we're also going to be thinking about what does that mean vis-a-vis China's economics. It's not the economic powerhouse it was. It's struggling with its labor force. What does that mean as far as, well, historically, countries arm themselves as a distraction away from economic realities. And I'm not saying that's what's going on, but we need to bear in mind that's one part of this whole context. I'm going to move the discussion on to Professor Simbulan. There's other countries, Asian countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, have expressed concern that AUKUS could lead to an arms race in the region. And President Rodrigo Duterte himself expressed his sentiments during a press briefing that this trilateral agreement, could escalate a nuclear arms race. What's your view on this, Professor, and with regards maybe Taiwan as well?
Yeah, Paul. Well, to tell you frankly, I was not surprised, when this news came about, regarding the Australian, UK, and US alliance, so to speak. Although they're trying to make it appear as if it's a mere business transaction, between these countries involved. But I wasn't surprised at all because in the past few months, right after the inauguration of the Biden administration, the Democrats in the US Congress, both in the Senate and House of Representatives, have been pushing for a so-called strategic initiative act, which is actually, in fact, a new declaration, a declaration of a Cold War directed at China. And that's why this move in recent weeks involving the United States, the UK, and Australia was no surprise to me because it's part of the, I think, focus now of the United States to revive the containment, the containment strategy against China. To some extent, the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, where it has been bugged up for 20 years, is related to this focus, this realignment that the United States is trying to make, where it's trying to mobilize and harness all its allies in the Indo-Pacific area so that they would, contain China or try to contain China economically, politically, diplomatically, as well as militarily. So I see this recent transaction, no matter how they call it, where the United States and the UK are going to assist Australia in getting 8 nuclear-powered submarines, as a way of mobilizing one of their top allies in this region to be more active. And at the same time, I think part of the trade-off there will be that the United States will seek more involvement by Australia in its grand strategy in the Asia-Pacific region and directed against China.
Do you think willingly that Australia has made itself let's say, you know, a ready, willing partner to support this strategy of the US in the South China Sea, which is not by accident. You know, they are the proxy partner which stops the US taking, you know, overt military action itself. It's a very subtle way of being able to engineer what you want to do without it being, you know, US naval vessels actually in that area, which is, you know, less confrontational, but fairly, you know, transparent as far as, you know, any military assessment of the situation. What's your view on that, Professor?
Well, the entire Pacific Ocean, including the South China Sea, has always been considered as an American lake, dominated by the US 7th Fleet. No? And I think now, because of the rise of China, especially its economic rise, and China has also made sure that it can now be able to at least defend itself against any potential threat to its shores, no? Especially its cities, as well as its commercial vessels that ply in the South China Sea. And what the United States is trying to do is that they would like it to be a collective, you know, to appear as if it is really a collective effort, not just a unilateral one by the United States. So they're going, you know, this is not the first time. That's why, as I said, I'm not surprised, especially the involvement of Australia, because the US before has been involved quite intimately with Australia through the AUSKUS alliance. No, of course, it also involved New Zealand, but the AUSKUS became largely inactive because of the nuclear-free declaration of New Zealand. But besides AUSKUS, there is still the Five Eyes agreement, no, in which Australia, New Zealand, UK, US, and Canada are involved, no, in a tightly knit intelligence sharing, especially with the use of their eavesdropping technologies, no. And of course, recently also there's the Quad, no, where the United States is really trying to engage in active alliance building, which during the Trump administration had been, had been somehow ignored, no, because President Trump had somehow antagonized many of his allies, including in Europe, no. Now, of course, this recent development in the Asia-Pacific region, no, involving the US, UK, and Australia, I think, has also somehow resurrected some fears in Europe, because evidently the EU was not properly consulted in this decision. So they I think they're antagonized, and this has strengthened the move by some Europeans to have the view that, let's form our own military alliance and not rely too much on the United States, because the proper consultations with a close and traditional ally like the US, evidently it did not happen. In this case. And they even, junked the agreement, Australia, to the point of junking the agreement with France.
Yeah. I want to come back to you and Andrew on this, but there's a question I want to put to Andrew quickly. I want to come back to you, Professor, to say, well, what's the impact and implications of this for the Philippines specifically? But Andrew, can we maybe just clear up, this vote farce on, an agreement with France, probably over a 2-year plus period of discussions? how is it that Australia suddenly, if it was at all indeed suddenly, they decided the submarine briefing, the spec, was not suitable for today's modern warfare? Or was there another reason, which was China's increasing aggression in the area? Australia wanted to increase and improve its security, and that's why they made the decision they did. Can you maybe shed some light on what you think was the context behind this change away from France and towards this AUKUS alliance?
Well, it's hard from the outside to judge this. I mean, I think it really looks like kind of a diplomatic error. As you say, why would you suddenly kind of change? I mean, these are meant to be countries that share similar values. I mean, obviously the UK has left Europe, but still, I mean, the European Union countries, NATO, Australia, New Zealand, Canada are all connected together in many ways, support each other, have similar value systems that we're trying to kind of project onto the world, not so successfully these days, it seems. So I think it was a real disappointment to see that. And I think somewhere there must have been kind of policy decision mistakes, diplomatic mistakes, because we shouldn't have a situation where, I mean, obviously people need to make decisions about what they purchase and their security interests, but in a way we're kind of all in this together. So I just look at this as an outsider and say there were mistakes made, and I'm not surprised that France is as upset and as they have been on that. This is just not the way we should be conducting our collectively. If you think kind of the liberal Western countries, I mean, obviously Australia is not in the West, but shares similar values. It's not the way we should be conducting our military cooperation and our diplomatic cooperation. Of course, it just sends a signal to China that we're fractured, which we are, which is very disappointing.
Well, I agree. It would, this needs the support of Europe, France, rather than it being divisive. But it does seem a bit strange that, suddenly you decide you need a nuclear-powered submarine, on the face of it.
Yeah, no, it does. It does seem very strange, and it just, I mean, how many times have you recall? I mean, you think about this collection of countries that are tightly bound together. When was the last time you can recall someone recall that they recalled their ambassador? I mean, that's just a major step. So something went wrong in this process. I don't know who's to blame, if we want to put blame on it. But as I said, I think it's just disappointing. And I think the Western liberal countries, I'm of the view, these are my personal views, not PwC's views, but I'm of the view that we represent something important with our value systems, and we should be standing together. So to see this played out in such a public way, and around the issue of China, which is so enormous, is really, I think, disappointing for the Western, the Western world.
Well, we do need, the wisdom of some, I'm going to call them senior statesmen or women, so as not to let this become an us and them situation. I mean, there's now in the media talk about the trade talks between the EU and Australia being postponed or delayed. The level of that trade is in the hundreds of billions. So there's no way on the planet that that's going to somehow be compromised. So there's a bit of saber rattling, I think, going on, that the EU need to be seen to be supporting their French partner. And maybe in the fullness of time, there'll be a way of working France back in, maybe with some parallel contracts, who knows. But it's the job of the statesman to engineer the alliance across all Western parties. I'm going to come back to the professor, because the white elephant in the room, if we're not careful, is to not focus on the implications that this agreement has for the Philippines. So Professor, your overview of what you think this may mean, is there a new role for the Philippines to play, like an entente cordiale? Is it within its gift, as they say, to be able to do this? Historically, does it have the political clout? Or indeed, is this an opportunity for the Philippines to step up and to be seen to be, a significant player on the world stage?
Well, our geographic location in this area makes us inevitably an important player in this tension between the United States and China, because Taiwan is right north of the Philippines, and the South China Sea is on our western side. No? And I would like to say that this has implications on the Philippines. Remember, in 1987, our 1987 new constitution, in its declaration of principles and state policies, prohibited nuclear weapons from any part of Philippine territory. And this constitutional provision became the legal instrument for the Philippine Senate in 1991 to remove the U.S. bases from the Philippines as our contribution to the end of the Cold War, and also in consonance with the constitutional prohibition on nuclear weapons, as American bases were in the Philippines were known to either transit or store nuclear weapons. And the Philippines, by the way, was also instrumental in the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty that was eventually approved by the 10 member Southeast Asian countries. So in other words, you know, this so-called deal with Australia, United States, UK, with Australia, where they are going to sell, and in the media report, no, the way it was made public, is these are nuclear-powered submarines. Now, if we are to look closely at the models of these submarines that are being sold, no, they're not just actually nuclear-powered, no, but in fact could be nuclear armed, and that is no speculation, because it's just like selling to Australia let's say a Lamborghini to somebody, a Lamborghini car, and using it as a taxi. You know, to use it for a taxi, you sell a Lamborghini for Australia to use as a taxi, no? Because these nuclear-powered, these types of models, no, I mean, I've consulted with and looked at the literature of the nuclear-powered submarines of the United States of this kind of class. No, I believe they are Ohio class, as they consider the nuclear. And they most of them are nuclear armed. So would this not be a violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? No, and especially now that most countries of the world, no, have already since the beginning of this year practically ratified the treaty on prohibiting nuclear weapons. No, so as far as the Philippines is concerned, this would somehow violate our constitution, no? And also the principle behind the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty.
Well, you touch on a very significant, sensitive area within the way in which this plays out, because it does bring about another set of discussions. We're going to have to take a break. We will pick up on this. We'll be right back, and let's try and involve Naz in some of these questions. So let's take a break. Naz, while we're off air,
this is my jam.
Every day, the Philippines does more than wait. together new adventures. And experiences for you to try. We're making ourselves better for you to see. Cooking up new dishes for you to taste. And preparing cultural discoveries for you to feel. And we're not stopping. Because we know that you deserve more. We can't wait to welcome you.
Watching the Filipinos World. For your cooling services, please contact everycool.ph. And for your seafoods requirements, please contact Ichibon Seafoods. Still with us, we have Dr. Andrew S. NEVIN and Professor Roland Simbulan of the University of the Philippines. And we have also Mr. Paul MARKEVICIUS. Paul?
Yes, thank you, Naz. So the last point that the professor made, which is quite significant, nuclear powered submarines, will it lead to nuclear armed, which is will contravene the rules regarding nuclear arms within that area with the countries in alliance. This is the next level of debate one imagines, and one imagines China is going to put this forward. There's the who started it first question, and there's the line in the sand beyond which a certain country, let's say in this case we know it to be China, it shouldn't cross. We've seen land grabs by China converting atolls into military bases. Should there be a line in the sand which shouldn't be crossed? It is being crossed, and we should try and acknowledge that this is why this is happening in the first place. Andrew, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm just an economist, not a political analyst. I mean, it's difficult to see, though, in modern warfare, given the potency of all the weapons. I mean, how do you have a military conflict that doesn't escalate out of control? I mean, what we've seen over the last 5 years from the United States, and of course drawing its Western allies into it, is trying to have an increasing economic isolation of China, and rules around not using Chinese technology, more stringent listings have stopped essentially in the stock exchange there. So I mean, it's hard to see how to draw a military line in the sand. What I personally expect is we're going to see more of this economic decouplement and tit for tat, the trade issues. I mean, the U.S. came out yesterday and said China was not honoring the trade agreement that was done under President Trump. Of course, Australia is drawn into this because they've had, because of all the tensions with China over the last few years, they've had their exports of wine, but more importantly of coal, have been stopped out of Australia. Canada, my own country, has had a lot of difficulties. People may be familiar with the case of the two Michaels and Meng Chang-wei, and she was just released in exchange for them being released on that. But we had potash and uranium exports stopped out of Canada to China. So you can see this from an economic perspective, increasing escalation of the economic tensions, and in some sense an attempt at kind of decoupling on that. And I was doing a program the other day with one of the most senior bank CEOs in the world, and he made the comment that, there's always these kinds of ebbs and flows, but inevitably economic forces will win out and people will kind of re-globalize. I'm not sure that's actually accurate. I mean, what we're seeing in real time is many parties, or both sides, if we want to call it two sides, kind of trying to damage each other economically. And of course, then the countries in Southeast Asia, Philippines being perhaps the one that's the most in the center of all of this, being affected by it. But of course, it affects every country: Thailand, Vietnam, Japan, Korea, all kind of caught up in this increasing economic conflict. So I don't kind of know where it's going, and I don't know if there's a military confrontation. I mean, what or potential for that? I mean, how does the United States respond militarily to provocation by China? If you take the obvious example, if China decides now is the time to move to Taiwan, and yesterday it was reported that they had 36 flyovers of military jets in Taiwanese airspace, the most ever, I believe. If China decides now is the time to strike, for example, with Taiwan, what is the U.S. going to? How are they going to respond in a military sense? And does it have the potential to escalate to something that is just catastrophic for the world?
Well, indeed, and we are looking at where does this go next? Will it be Taiwan as the theatre of conflict within the theatre of conflict, which potentially we could already describe and ascribe to the South China Sea? Will the US be a reliable ally for Taiwan? Will it be a reliable ally for the Philippines if it goes that way? And, Duterte has welcomed significant investment from China. And one wonders, this is a question for you, Professor, that, is it to look the other way whilst China, sets up, militarizes its bases in disputed or contested territorial waters, but also specifically crossing into the borders, ignoring the line in the sand of other countries, specifically the Philippines. So, Professor, how much of an ally will the US be? And, where does this leave the Philippines? Does it have to take a stand? Will Duterte make that stand? Will it be up to the next incoming president of the Philippines to show their hand? Will they support the US or China moving forward?
Yes, thank you. Well, in the past 5 years of the Duterte administration, I think the so-called pivot of Duterte towards China has been very much overrated. Of course, he has made very strong pronouncements against the United States and also very friendly gestures towards China. But let us not forget that despite these strong pronouncements, I had hoped that Duterte would resort to what they call real hedging between the two big powers. But that did not really happen because in the first place, our security agreements with the United States have not really been affected or touched during the Duterte administration. And before the pandemic occurred, the number of joint military exercises between the Philippines and the United States under Duterte even have been increasing over the years until 2019, because in 2020 these joint military exercises were either canceled because of the pandemic. What I'm saying is that the so-called pivot of Duterte towards China has been really overrated because in the first place, US forces are parked in Philippine military bases under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement in 5 of our largest Philippine or AFP, Armed Forces of the Philippines bases. They've allowed the United States under this agreement to set up military installations and even station troops. It's estimated that there are about between 300 to 500 American troops permanently deployed, most of them with in special operations and those operating drones. So, and then besides that, we have 4 existing security agreements, not to mention the Mutual Defense Treaty, the Mutual Logistics and Support Agreement, the Visiting Forces Agreement, and also the Philippine-US Military Advisory and Assistance Agreement. These are all intact and are being fully implemented in the a very strong and close relationship between the Philippine military and the Pentagon. So in recent months, by the way, 2 months ago, the Philippines and the United States reaffirmed the visiting forces agreement. You see, Duterte was using the supposedly notice of termination of the VFA to counter human rights criticism against him in the US Congress, because since 2016 he has been severely criticized by members of the Democratic Party for allegedly for violations of human rights and extrajudicial killings in the anti-drug operations. So there have been some investigations in the U.S. right in the U.S. Congress to so that they could tie up U.S. military assistance to the Philippines with human rights record of the Philippines. So he used the VFA, tending that he will send a notice of termination. But recently, as I said, this VFA, Visiting Forces Agreement between our two countries, was reaffirmed. So it's now stronger than ever. And in other words, it's business as usual, and even the expected aid, for infrastructure from China and investments has been, has been observed as very disappointing, because we were expecting a lot of, for the build projects, infrastructure of the Duterte to be financed by China. These have been either very slow or, if I'm not mistaken, in the estimate of our National Economic Development Authority, only about 1/4 of what was promised was actually delivered in terms of economic aid, and investments, to the Philippines.
Well, we've seen the pattern. The nature of Chinese investment is not without conditions, and if you look at Africa, those conditions are quite punitive. If you renege on the deal, they end up owning the port or the airport or both, and the means of exporting the precious minerals that have brought China there in the first place. That's the story of modern day Africa and its Chinese relationship. We see a situation where Duterte may be cleverly running with the hare and the hounds. Andrew, that's quite a skill, not take the money from China, even if it's on a drip feed level, but pretty much maintain your relations with the US, which maybe ultimately long term the Philippines will be the beneficiary of. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the Philippines is kind of in a unique historical and geographical position vis-a-vis China. It may be successful trying to kind of run with the hare and run with the hounds. In a way, I don't think it has much choice. It has such deep security ties with the United States, and it's right on China's doorstep. And I guess the Chinese calculation, and I'm just speculating on this, is, why you wouldn't want to necessarily damage. I understand the fracturing of the relationship with Australia, but in China's very long-term interest, it presumably wants the Philippines to be an ally in Southeast Asia within the Chinese influence. So it would seem to me from the calculus, you wouldn't necessarily want to kind of upset this right at the moment. And I think that Chinese, I can tell you this from living there for 10 years, view history on their side. They're in their view only going to get stronger and stronger and stronger on that. So they can afford to bide their time and don't have to necessarily vis-a-vis the Philippines, precipitate any kind of crisis on that. And I don't believe in the course of the last number of years, the professor correct me, that there's really been flashpoints necessarily between China and the Philippines. It's been between China and other countries.
Paul?
Yes, Naz.
Yeah, I have a question for Professor Simbulan. Professor, with the reaffirmation of the VFA by the president, and while we are also continuing the partnership with China, do you think it would be beneficial for the country to remain neutral on this pact?
Yes, I would say that in the current tension and current competition between the United States and China, that the Philippines, especially given its geographic location, should remain as neutral as possible, and engage in what some geostrategists refer to as hedging between the two powers. But that will mean that we will have to abrogate our security agreements with the United States, because it is these agreements that allow U.S. forces to station in our territory, make use of our bases, our ports, and also to train their forces here. That usually they, as in past experience, they have used for getting involved in other countries' conflicts. So, given our location, especially, if we are to become neutral, really neutral, and this neutrality is also, by the way, consistent with the 1972 Southeast Asian Declaration of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality. If we are to really become neutral, we will have to abrogate our agreements, current agreements with the United States, and not allow the stationing of forces, because our country is in danger of being used as it was before, especially during the Vietnam War, to be used by the United States as a launching pad or springboard for America's, let us theoretically say, if it were in conflict with the United States, it would use our territory as a launching pad against China, and our people will be endangered. You see, we will be at the front line. The Chinese missiles targeting these U.S. forces. There may be submarines or aircraft carriers that come in and out of the Philippines. They're going to. We risk endangering the security of our nation and its very existence.
So, Professor, you've outlined the almost, I won't say precarious, but very potentially vulnerable, sensitive position the Philippines is in vis-a-vis this theater of conflict. Being neutral, does that mean taking a position to be neutral, taking a position to say, we will broker ongoing peaceful discussions and we will see that as our role, rather than being reactive by the power plays of these bigger countries around you? I'm just wondering whether it is time to say the Philippines deserves respect for its position. Not saying it doesn't have respect now, but we do have a role to play, but it isn't just a patsy for what you guys want to play out as far as your own economic interests. And how does the Philippines do this, practically speaking, and within the politics of the whole situation, geopolitics?
Yes, Paul, I believe that if the Philippine government and its leaders were to take hedging very seriously, and I had thought that the Duterte administration would be serious about it at the beginning, but it seemed that it was not. If we are to take it seriously, we will try to be close to both the United States and China, and all the other countries in the region. And I think that we are we do not only, this is not just our aspiration that will be good for us, but most of the ASEAN countries aspire that goal, because if ever there is going to be conflict in this part of the world, they are going to be the first ones to be affected, especially economically, the trade relationships, that have thrived over the years with the rise of China, and I hope that China, with this Australian, UK, US Pact, I hope it will not really accelerate a new arms race, because that is precisely what China has been avoiding.
Professor, I need to just jump in a second. I know Andrew's time is very tight. He's got another meeting. Andrew, any last thoughts before we thank you and say goodbye?
Well, just to come back a bit, Paul, to the economic issue. I mean, we saw this collapse of the Soviet Union. There was a misunderstanding in the West, certainly in the 60s and 70s, about overestimating the Soviet Union's economic strength. In the case of China, I mean, I saw the transformation personally. As I said, I went there first in 1983, so it's real. But there is a real question now with China's demographics, shrinking population, aging population, their overinvestment in fixed real estate. We've seen the recent problems with Evergrande. So they may be having to now confront the economic model they've had for the last few decades, which, again, from a kind of classic economics perspective, we can't believe it's right because of the way they direct capital, state-directed capitalism, if you want to call it, the way they decide at the center how capital is invested. So, in the classical economics, you think of that as malinvestment. And we may be coming up to an interesting phase in the China economic story where that is really coming out. On the other hand, I don't think, as I said, I don't think it's as fragile as the Soviet Union economically. So I don't think the West can rely on this new phase of economic weakness to kind of rebalance some of the issues there. But overall, I'd like to be optimistic that we'll find solutions to it, but I fear we're going to have a number of years of increasing escalation of tensions. I mean, the Chinese military objectives or the strategic objectives, particularly around regaining Taiwan, are very clear on that, and I don't see any easy solution. So, and of course, I think as the professor put it very well, not just the Philippines, but all the ASEAN countries have a great interest in finding kind of a superpower détente that we don't seem to be on track for right now.
Okay, great, Andrew. Well, I know you have a busy schedule. Thank you very much for your contribution today. Always appreciated. I'm going to turn over to Professor. Professor, maybe you'd like to, maybe your summing up thoughts. Thank you ever so much, Andrew. Your summing up thoughts, things that maybe we haven't asked you that are germane to this discussion that should be raised.
Well, I think it would be to the best interest of the Philippines as well as our neighboring ASEAN countries if we do not align ourselves with either the United States or China in their competition. It's my observation that unlike the past great powers, China has tried to avoid the mistakes of the former big powers from Europe, including the US, Japan, and the former Soviet Union. It has avoided so far, despite its economic prowess, it has avoided engaging in an arms race because it knows that this is what led to the collapse of the former Soviet Union and its fragmentation. Now, I think it is to the benefit of all countries of the world, including the United States, if the economic interests and competition were allowed, and was tolerated, because that's what capitalism is all about. They should welcome the China has since China entered that race and since it joined the IMF, World Bank, it has tried to be a good capitalist.
Well, Professor, I'm going to have to stop you there. We don't want to end on capitalism on the note of aspirational capitalism, but we accept it has its role as an economic driver. We would love to have you back on the program. This is an ongoing discussion, and we can see this playing out for far longer, hopefully not in a way that endangers the Philippines. So I'd like to say thank you very much for your time and participation. Very, very appreciated. And look forward to having you back, sir. We're going to have to close the program. Naz, I'm going to hand over to you. And thank you once again, Professor, for your time.
Thank you for having me, Paul.
All right, we're going to pause for a short break, Paul. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So much.
Filipinos World live on RPN, and would like to say thank you to all who tune in this afternoon, and especially to those who commented on our Facebook Live. Would like to say hi to Mr. Rick Rubio in Neon of EnviroCool Corporation. Also like to thank Ate Cora Figueresin, CP Dennis, Marichu Martin, live watching from Bacolod City. Mr. June Aguilar has been very supportive and sharing his thoughts regarding our topic this afternoon. He also said, great program, TFW, and mabuhay ka, Professor Roland Simbulan. For suggestions and comments and feedbacks, guys, you may please get in touch with our email address, thefilipinosworld@gmail.com. You may also follow us on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube channel, The Filipinos World. If you want to become one of our sponsors, please send us your intent via email at thefilipinosworld@gmail.com. And if you are, or if you want your story to be featured in the Filipinos World and you believe you are one of the Filipinos who inspire other Filipinos, please let us know and write us an email via thefilipinosworld@gmail.com.
We wish to thank all our guests for today, Dr. Andrew S. Nevin and Professor Roland Simbulan of the University of the Philippines, for gracing today's episode here in the TFW. I'd like to say a personal thank you to Naz and of course Agnes behind the scenes for putting the program together. Thank you, Agnes, and thank you, Naz.
Thank you, Paul. The Filipinos World would like also to thank you, Paul Markevicius, EP, the technical team, Engineer Jong Sindigo and Engineer Ernie Banzon, Station Manager, Ms. Jean Serejijos, Social Media Manager or Social Media Team, Mount Malm, kaagapay ako ng OFW KSA, and to all our supporters and viewers of the Filipinos World. We'd also would like to thank the local government of Calamba City and Ichibon. We have also Boyan, Seafoods, EnviroCool, Lap Modal AS.
For this we say, we bring Filipinos closer to the world. We bring the world closer to the Filipinos and Filipinos closer to each other.
This has been your ka-TFW, NAZH-FAR, MARIWA, BERGANIO, and Mr. Paul Markevicius, our executive producer, live from London, wishing everyone a blessed weekend and stay safe. We miss you, Miss Agnes.
Nandito ng lahat, saan pa pupunta? Malalim ang dagat at mababaw ang ligaya. Halatang Pilipino ka, abot langit ang iyong ngiti. Lahi It's more fun in the Philippines. Bakit malalayo?
RPN, Radio Philippines Network Incorporated, DXKO.